about deeper underlying issues that are causing the problem. So we can put a Band-Aid on it, but we're losing blood at such a pace that the Band-Aid's not going to do any good.
We are a society in crisis, and people are going to anesthetize themselves. So until we start saying we have a larger crisis than heroin, heroin is the symptom. It is saying people have to anesthetize themselves to get through this life. It is not the cause. So here we are, and we're worried about heroin. Well, if we did not have heroin, what would it be? We're coming out with the designer drugs now. And that will be the next epidemic. There will always be an epidemic. The question is how big? Well, it's only going to get smaller if we have a national dialogue, seeing that we are having an increase in all kinds of drug use. But don't think of it at first as a drug. We don't have to ask why heroin's a problem. We have to ask why despair is the problem. Because despair is what is being anesthetized.
One of the outcomes of childhood distress is addiction. So that if you look at the research literature on addiction, the more adversity you've experienced in your childhood, the greater the risk of addiction, exponentially. And in the downtown east side, Vancouver, which is a population very much affected by addiction, in 14 years I never met a single woman who had not been sexually abused as a child. And many of the men had been abused, traumatized, abandoned, neglected. Terrible things happened to them over time. Now, addictions are not the problem, at least, of course they are a problem, but they're also the attempt to solve a problem. And the problem is unbearable psychic distress or pain. So there's no understanding of addiction without understanding human pain. And there's no understanding of human pain without understanding human childhood experience. So it all goes back to that. And that's for two reasons. One is that it instills the pain that then you try and soothe with the drugs. And not just the drugs, also with addictive behaviors of all kinds, from shopping to eating to work to internet to pornography to gambling, video games, whatever you're addicted to. These are all your attempts to escape pain, distress, discomfort with the self. And no infant is uncomfortable with themselves, so that discomfort is a response to the parents' discomfort. And in the case of the most traumatized population, the parents' high level of dysfunction, which goes back to their own childhoods. So there's no one to blame, it's multi-generational, but that's how it's transmitted. It's not genetic. Alcoholism is not a genetic disease. Drug addiction is not a genetic disease. That's one of those myths that our society likes to hold on to. It runs in families, but not because of genes, but because of emotional patterns and behaviors that give rise to that same pain and that same desire to escape from the pain. So that's the first reason. The second reason why negative childhood experiences, particularly trauma, predisposed to addiction is because it actually shapes the brain in certain ways. So that the brain's reward chemicals, the circuitry that modulates those chemicals, doesn't develop as well in a traumatized child. Nor do the circuits that regulate stress. So their way of regulating stress is to do something that soothes their pain temporarily. So when you're stressed, you're going to drink a lot, eat a lot, go shopping, spend money you haven't got, do drugs. Those circuits, again, develop or don't in response to childhood experience. And the more supportive and secure the environment, the more optimally those circuits develop. Now you've got the reward and the pleasure and the happiness chemicals inside you. And they're available to you. But what happens if the environment doesn't promote or encourage that kind of development? Then you'll be seeking it from the outside. So addictions, whether physical or behavioral, are all about trying to seek something from the outside that you're not able to generate from within. And it all goes back to pain and loss and, in the severe cases, trauma.
Tanner, I'm from Central Pennsylvania.
Why are you here today?
To speak on my addiction.
What addiction is that?
Heroin addiction. I've had my addiction for like 8 years now, but heroin for like 3 or 4.
How old are you?
20.
20?
Yeah.
So, you started when you were early teens?
Yeah.
What did you start on first?
K2.
Why did you get started? How did you get started down the drug road?
I mean, I was a pretty good kid, and I just started having problems when I was younger. Stemmed from other problems, but
Like, what kind of problem?
being sexually molested, and
Was that by a family member?
my mom's ex-husband. Yeah.
My name is America.
Okay. You've had an addiction problem?
Yes. Yes, I've actually had several. Been addicted to several drugs.
Okay. And what drugs were they?
When I was 19, my addiction was with Xanax and any type of benzo that I could get my hands on. I had got off that, and I was being prescribed opiates from my doctor, which led to opiate addiction, which then turned into a very bad heroin addiction. I wish I could stop thinking about heroin. I wish that it would just go away. I wish I could go back to the day before I tried it. Because I know that mentally, I'm never gonna be the same as before.
How has your relationships become with your parents now?
We don't have one. We don't have one. They're both still addicts. I love them dearly.
Your parents are heroin addicts?
They're addicted to pills more than heroin. I mean, they'll do heroin.
Mm-hmm.
They'll do any drug that's in front of them.
How long were you using and what were you using?
On and off since I was 12. Everything. I've tried absolutely every drug you can think of at least once. So, started alcohol, weed, Special K, ecstasy, acid, cocaine, heroin, pills, everything.
And why started you down that road at 12 years old?
I want to say I was lonely. You know, growing up alone and not really having, like, my mom was into her addiction, into her men and stuff, and I had nobody. And I didn't have friends because we moved a lot, like 14 times over like a 7-year period is a lot of times, you know. A lot of different school systems. I wasn't allowed to do sports and do extracurricular activities. 1, because my mom couldn't afford it, and 2, because I had heart issues. So I was always the outcast, and I was a little heavier when I was younger. So I felt like once I learned about drugs a little bit and knew what people were doing, I started doing them and stealing them. So now I had my own drugs. I was able to get friends because I was supplying the weed. I was supplying the alcohol. So it started as a way to get friends, to have people, you know, quote unquote family, you know, be accepted somewhere.
We are at an amazing time in public health right now in terms of how we're looking at children. And I'm hoping that we all come together to figure out how to support children in a way that will affect them now and our entire population far, far into adulthood. If you go back 100 years, people had 5 or 6 kids. Why? Because most of them died, and most of them died from germs. And then we conquered the germs, right? We figured out between antibiotics and between how to boil water and to pasteurize milk and how to immunize kids, we learned how to make kids survive. Then what we focused on was we focused on the psychosocial morbidities, those behaviors that were more likely to affect kids' health. And then what we did is we tried to figure out which kids were more likely to have negative behaviors. In other words, kids fall off a cliff, where should I build the fence and for whom should I build the fence? That made us do large studies to figure out which kids were broken. The answers were not surprising. The answer is you were more likely to break if you were a victim of economic, social, or racial injustice. You were more likely to break if you had an absent father. You were more likely to break if your mother had psychiatric illness. So we knew where to build the fence, but we set ourselves up for racism and for classism in public policy. Where we're at right now is we're saying, let's not let kids get to the fence. Let's figure out how to move them back from the fence. So we're looking at the social determinants that affect health. And what that means is it's not about race, it's about racism. It's not about poverty, it is about unequal distribution of resources. And what it is, more than anything else, is that it's about trauma. We now understand what adverse childhood experiences do to kids. There was an amazing study led by Filidi and Anda in 1998. And we're just beginning now to really move forward with our knowledge of what this means. Here's what they did. They looked at thousands of mostly middle-class people in California. And they were looking at 50, 60, 70-year-olds. And they asked them all the regular questions that studies ask, like what's happened to your health? What's happened in your life? Tell us a little bit about who you are, your race, your gender, your age. But they did something different. They said, tell us about what happened to you when you were a child. And they looked at whether you were abused, whether you witnessed violence, whether your parent used drugs. And here's what we learned. We learned that if you were abused, you were more likely to get divorced during your adulthood. Not a surprise. If you were abused, you were more likely to do drugs during adulthood. I don't think that's a surprise either. We learned that you were more likely to get viral hepatitis. Not a big surprise if you understand how you get it. You were more likely to be obese. You were more likely to get diabetes. You were more likely to get heart disease. You were more likely to get strokes. You were more likely to get certain kinds of cancers. You were more likely to get autoimmune diseases. You were more likely to get osteoporosis. You were more likely to get brittle bones as an elderly woman if you were neglected or abused as a child. That is shocking, but not surprising if you understand the body. And there's this magical unless that I need you to hear, because this would be terrible news. But the unless is unless you had a loving, responsible adult who stood beside you through the most difficult times. And if you did, you ended up looking very much like everybody else. Which means, folks, that we are at a pivotal moment in public health. It means that what we do is we work hard to eliminate any sorts of child maltreatment or neglect. We raise kids up. But we also raise parents to learn how to be loving and responsible and supportive. And we prepare communities how to support kids through difficult times because we believe it's going to make a difference. What do we know happens to kids? Not all kids. Many kids come through trauma just fine. But what happens to kids? What happens is their brain is more likely to become the amygdala, which is the frog brain, the reactive brain, is on fire. The cerebral cortex, which is the thinking part of the brain that kind of slows down the emotions or processes the emotions, is hurt. The hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that helps you integrate thoughts, feelings, and facts, is damaged. So what does it mean kids are like when they've been traumatized? Not all kids, but they're more likely to be hypervigilant, to never know when something bad is going to happen. As a result, they don't necessarily trust us, and they've earned the right to not trust us. What else does it make you? It makes you reactive. It makes you more likely to be volatile, to snap in a second. Why? Because you had to. What else? It makes you more likely to be dissociative, to zone out. Why? If you speak to someone who's been abused, they can remember what their ceiling looked like. They can remember the crack on the ceiling, how many dots were on the tiles, but they don't remember their childhood. Thank God, because it's protective for them to have lost those memories. And then they needed to fill up those spaces, those absent moments, with a story. So they might be more likely to confabulate, to make up stories that might not make sense to the rest of us. They might be more likely to lie. Why? Because if your daddy comes home and he opens up the refrigerator and wants a hot dog and he says, hey, who took the last hot dog? And you said, me, daddy, and then you get thrown against the wall, you learn to say, I don't know, we're the big hairy monster. So people who have been through trauma might be more likely to be reactive. They might be more likely to lie. They might be more likely to confabulate, to make things up, to zone out, to not be aware of things, to not trust people, which means that sometimes it's really hard to work with people who have been through trauma. Because, you know, I'm worthy of trust. I'm a sweet guy. How can you be reactive to me? We know it's not about you. And core to being able to love people under any condition is to know what's about you and what's not about you. Core to being able to love is to be able to look at a human being with a different frame, a different lens. So that rather than looking at them with what's wrong with you, you look at them with what happened to you. Now, that doesn't mean you should say that to a kid, because it'll trigger them. But when you can calm yourself amidst any behavior by knowing something happened to the kid, it enables us to love. Another big thing we have to do is learn how to hold people's pain without owning their pain. We can't conquer their past, but we can make it safe to feel again. We can hold their pain. And when we do this, we learn appropriate boundaries, we learn how to protect kids, we learn how to move kids forward. You know, I talked about what kids are like who are traumatized. And some of it doesn't sound so positive. But you know, I'm blessed to be able to work with these kids. And let me tell you something. I don't want trauma to be just another label, just another thing that is wrong with you. What I will tell you is that the kids I work with, yeah, they may be traumatized, but by and large, they're the most sensitized human beings you're ever going to meet. These are the kids who want to repair the world. These are the kids who are frustrated by the what is and begin to think about the possibility of what ifs. If we can capture these kids at this pivotal moment in their lives and really support them in a loving and nurturing way, these are the kids who want to be our future social workers, our doctors, our nurses, our police officers. That's who, our DHS workers. This is who all of my kids want to be because they've seen injustice, they've seen wrong, and they want to correct it. It's a magical moment in time. If we can harness their sensitivity and make them know that trauma is awful, but it also creates growth. You know, resilience is not about invulnerability. Resilience is about being able to bounce. When we're looking at what successful kids should be, we want to raise a generation of kids who are compassionate, who are loving, who are generous of spirit, who are empathetic. These kids that I'm talking about who have been through so much, who have been through so much heart, they have this by the gallonful when we can draw it out and make it safe again for them to feel.
Actually, I tried it, did the whole cigarette smoking too, and it just started from there, you know, here and there, and it just got worse and worse, progressed.
You want to describe worse and worse?
It went from, alright, like I used to play soccer, and it went from me smoking and drinking maybe once every couple weeks to every weekend. I stopped going to soccer. I thought I was missing out on it. I started having friends come to the house all the time. And this whole time my mom had no idea that that's what I was doing.
How's that possible?
What I did was I basically hid behind my sister. When she was doing what she was doing, I was able to kind of like sneak by. Every time she went out to smoke a cigarette, I just said I was out there sitting with her when I was really smoking with her. So I was able to kind of hide it from her for a while. So my mom remarried, and she remarried a guy that was in the Army. So he was very like in your face, you know what I mean, had to be in everything.
Drill sergeant?
Yeah, pretty much. You know, besides that, like, I mean, I remember him dragging me and my sister up by our hair to our rooms if we didn't go to our room. And, like, he never hit me, but I've seen him punch my sister in the face, slam her head on marble counters, push over my mom to get to her. And this would all happen because my mom and my sister were arguing. So he would get involved. Like, I'll always remember the one night when he was going after my sister, and I grabbed the phone and I sat in a corner crying my eyes out, debating whether or not to call 911 because I didn't know if my mom would get mad at me or not. And I never did. And I told her this, and she's like, oh, you know, it's okay, he's not going to do anything, even though he just did.
Put the big girl panties on. and just to move on from what happened. I mean, not saying you got to forget about it, but you can't just let it hold on to you forever. Sometimes you just got to shake it off. And, you know, it does hurt, you know, knowing that girls went through the same thing that I went through,
What is that same thing?
being molested, whether it was by, you know, family members or people that they didn't know. I know it hurts. It's still sometimes when I want to cry, you know, and just go off. But it's other times when I just feel like, you know, it happened, and you know.
How many girls does that happen to?
A lot. It's a lot of girls that it happened to. Like 75% of girls that I know has either been raped or molested by a family member, by a friend's family member, and it's sad, but you know, you can't take that. You can't take it back. That girl went through hard things in her life, and you know, for you actually putting it out there to say, you know, this is what she did, and this is what happened to her to lead her to that, and then people just come out of nowhere and just, you know, say the nasty, hateful things that they say. It's like, you know, girls wouldn't go through this if y'all would just pay attention to them. If family members would pay attention to them, you know, you could see it. It's not hard. It's not hard to see that somebody's been molested or raped. It's not hard. You could see it. You really can. And it's like it happening to me. You know, I could see it with any female. Even if they don't say it, I could see it. Not just because it happened to me. It's because you could see how it destroys a person. You could just like, you could see when a person that just goes into their shell and is depressed and doesn't want to do anything. You could just see like they're destroyed. And they turn to drugs because they're destroyed about what happened and they don't want to think about it. But they still don't understand that even when you turn to drugs, when that high wear off, oh, you're back to thinking about what happened to you. And it doesn't matter who it is. I mean, you know, some people don't turn to drugs. You know, some people turn into alcoholics or they turn into potheads. You know, it's just like, you know, it's not all about, you know, why they do it. Well, it is all about why they do it. You know, it's just that people don't look at the background of it. You know, they be like, oh, well, she didn't report it. Some people don't. I didn't. I didn't report it. You know what I did? I started drinking. I started smoking. I started getting wild. My brain was mixed up. And then I started getting into deep depression. And I could understand why females do that because they just feel like somebody's going to judge them. That's why all that hateful stuff that people write, I try not to, you know, comment on it and, you know, feed off of it. But it pisses me off because it's like some of you bastards out there, it just, you don't see what we're going through. You don't see why he's publishing the things that he's saying because y'all didn't live, y'all don't have to live the life that we went through. And, you know, some people that might, you know, comment on it might be the people that got raped or molested, and they look at you like, oh, well, you're a pervert for putting it out there. No, he's trying to save another life. It's about putting a story out there to save somebody else that's going through it. For they could read about it and be like, you know what? Let me stop doing these drugs. Let me actually, you know, go and get help and talk to somebody about it. Let me do something instead of, you know, getting high. It's bad. It's bad for us. Any drug is bad.
You see a lot of girls using drugs.
Yeah. I see nowadays, I see girls using pot, but I'm seeing more heroin than pot nowadays. You know, I ask myself why these young pretty girls is using heroin. It shocks me. It does. It shocks me. It's even males that use heroin that you could tell that something happened to them. You know, it's not just females, it's males too. But you know.
But you think there's a contributing factor that made them turn to drugs?
Yeah.
They don't just arbitrarily pick up the drug and the drug.
Yeah, they don't just pick it up.
Problem? Is heroin the problem?
No, heroin's not the problem. to me, heroin is not the problem. It's the background. It's the background to them doing the heroin. It's not the problem. You know, when you do coke and it ain't working for you no more, then you move up. You move up a drug. So it's like heroin is not the problem. It's the problem that happened. You know, and you know, some families, they either don't care or they either don't want to work through the problems. You know, and it's sad. It's sad. It's very sad. But it's just like, you know, at the end, you can't help somebody that don't want to be helped. You know, some of these men out here, they don't want to be helped. They don't want to come out and be like, you know, I've been molested by this person. I've been molested by this person. And it's just like, you know, it's sad that they don't want to come out, but it's just like, it's all about being judged.
Have you ever been addicted to heroin?
Yes.
And how long have you been on it?
Heroin 3 or 4 years. Opiates about 8 or 9.
How'd you start out on the drug road? How old were you?
10.
10. What did you start taking?
Started with cigarettes and cannabis.
Is there anything that just you felt as a vacuum growing up that was missing and you were trying to fulfill with it?
Well, I was very socially maladjusted when I was younger. I didn't really come into who I was until about halfway through high school. But then I get into high school and then I'm lacking intelligent conversation. So,
from what basis you lacking intelligence? You certainly don't seem ignorant to me.
yeah, but everyone else was.
Meaning?
All my friends were idiots.
Okay. And do you want to define idiot for me?
Not as smart as me.
Okay. So we're talking about that particular arena as far as what? Smart meaning?
It was going from the realm of one of the top schools in the nation to going to a backwoods public high school.
Okay.
And a lot easier to find and use drugs in high school than private school. Because I was the only one using drugs in private school. But public, I remember talking to a person asking if they smoked pot, and they said no, and I was completely astounded. It's the only person I knew that didn't smoke pot. The conversation didn't last long. Didn't care to talk to him too much after that.
If you were going to cite one main area that you see in an urban setting, which doesn't set us any different here in New York City from Baltimore or Philadelphia, Harrisburg, Allentown, and so forth, what would that issue be socially that you see that's driving so many kids to drugs?
Yeah, I mean, in the end, for me, and this is just, and wouldn't qualify myself as any type of expert, but just from my life experience, I go back and I believe education's a huge issue. I mean, education opens up so many doors and so many opportunities. If you live in an area that has a failing educational system and you're not getting that basic education, your ability to get a job, your ability to work your way through life is limited that much more.
This is what I see is these kids don't even know where home is. So with all the issues that they're dealing with in home life, they're going to take to school. They're not able to focus in school. What could be the biggest issue that any community could focus on that you think could make some type of impact in the way of prevention?
I've always been a big proponent, not just as far as addiction goes, but crime in general, is attacking the root causes of the crime, of the addiction. When we go into a home, if we're arresting a juvenile for a crime and there's several other juveniles there, to me we need to look into what were the root causes that caused that individual to start engaging in criminal behavior and antisocial behavior, because those same factors are going to impact the other kids that are coming behind them. And we need to get into the home at that point and try and deal with those issues. It's easy to throw your hands up and say, oh, well, it's the city, it's poor people, they don't want to do this, they don't want to do that. But when you deal with people on a one-to-one basis, you see that there's a lot of good people out there that want to make the proper decisions, that want to do the right things, and are just having trouble for one reason or another. So to me, if we spend the money on the front end trying to deal with the root causes of a lot of these issues, we're going to be better off on the back end. There's a group that I'm involved in called Fight Crime Invest in Kids, and it's police chiefs and district attorneys from all over the state of Pennsylvania. But you know, our big thing push right now is pre-K education, and trying to make sure that kids throughout the state of Pennsylvania have the ability to get that education before they even go to kindergarten, so they're not behind the 8 ball when they get to kindergarten. So those are the things when we try and front load, you know, get in the front end of things, that we need to start looking at what are the root causes of what's taking place. You know, why are people getting into crime in York? Why are people getting into addiction in York? What's causing these issues? And then try and put our social, you know, we have a lot of great services here in York County and York City, but we don't necessarily all work together. We're not all rowing the boat in the same direction, so to speak. We kind of go against each other, and we have to start working together in addressing those root causes of why crime and addiction is happening.
What factor does child abuse play into it?
It's another one of those root causes, I believe. You know, when you look at the amount of child abuse, especially sexual child abuse that's taking place, again, not only in the city, but throughout the county and our state and our nation, those individuals then, they're traumatized, they're impacted for life. We have to make sure that they have the proper services to try and help them through that problem, or all they're going to do is turn to possibly a lifestyle of addiction, possibly crime.
Because oftentimes what I see is the adults are talking to adults, but they're not talking to the kids.
Yeah, we don't listen to the children very much at all. And I mean, just think back to your own childhood when you were a teenager or a preteen. You get into that period, you believe you're invincible, you're very experimental. You know, there's no boundaries for you unless someone sets those boundaries for you. And there has to be people that have a positive influence on the person's life to be able to set those boundaries for them. And if they're not there, they can really go off course. You know, back when I was a real cop and was on the street working, I did a lot of gang work. And, you know, one of the things of all the various programs that have been tried throughout this country, the one thing that continually works is mentor programs. People that, you know, come from broken homes, that have possibly parents that are addicted or into things that they shouldn't be. There has to be a way to get that person a positive influence in order to straighten them out, or they're just going to follow the same path. You know, we come across the kids a lot of times that are out past curfew, and sometimes they're out past curfew because they don't want to go home, because the home life isn't what it should be. So to them, they're safer out on the street than they are going home to an abusive family, to a mother or father that's addicted, to a single parent household. So they'll spend their night out on the street, basically homeless, and then go to school the next day, and you have kids with their younger siblings that are trying to help them get through. So you have kids raising kids, and it's just it's this downward trend.
Oh, my grandmom started giving me cans of beer, probably younger than 6, to try to get me to sleep, but then it graduated to Jack Daniels and other things, but then over time it just got worse. So once I got older, I felt as though, okay, my grandmom gave it to me, so why not drink? Ended up with, I met these people at the power plant, these Caucasian young people like me around my age, and they asked if you want to go party, and we all went to go party, and then I never did cocaine before then. I used to pop E-pills, smoke weed, and drink. That's it. But that's the first encounter, that party. I ended up doing cocaine. I tried shrooms, and I thought dope to all mixed together. And then everything else, it felt like nothing else mattered when I was on drugs. Because I didn't have to feel, I didn't have to think about the things that I went through. I just didn't. I didn't see, like, to the point that I missed my birthdays, my daughter's birthdays. To go back to when I was 14, helping my homegirl, because she was a prostitute, and I ended up in jail for a solicitation job that I wasn't even into. I just was watching her back, but I ended up getting the same charge also. I did 2 years, but the 2 years seemed like 2 days because the high that I had, it seemed like it lasted forever. Because I also had people sneaking me stuff inside. The things I can remember at the earliest age, me being molested by my grandfather, also having a family member also leading me to get raped.
Let's start with your grandfather. How old were you and when did this happen?
I was 5 or 6 years old when I remember. I found out it was wrong once I actually heard another person say that they went through the same thing by being molested by somebody in their family, and I went to my parents and my grandparents and them, and basically they shut me out and said that it never happened, I was lying, I'm just making up stories. But I don't understand why would they say that, because they also told me in their life it happened to them. So.
By the same man?
By the same man. As me being as young as I was, why would I make something up like that? It's impossible for a child to constantly keep the same story that went on. So it's kind of crazy how family actually shuts you out and blindside the real actions that goes on in your life, so they can basically, so they won't be embarrassed.
What did your cousin do to you?
Well, my cousin set me up, drugged me to get raped so she can keep her boyfriend at the age of 12.
How did that help her keep her boyfriend?
I had to know by giving me to him, basically, so-called saved their relationship, and it traumatized me because I shut down for a nice amount of years. And
a couple weeks ago, I had my overdose experience. Humbling to say the least. The first time I used heroin, probably go back to about 18 years old. Just like any other drug, it was just, it was a party thing. Everyone else around me was doing it. And especially, if tragedy would strike, it would just send, a wave through. A wave of destruction.
It's no stranger. Does that mean your parents have addiction problems, or?
My dad, for on and off, basically his whole life. Because that's that's the typical story you hear. I mean, it's never, you know, an early happy ending.
What was his addiction to?
You name it. But I mean, primarily, heroin. My father was always in the picture. He's the best dad anyone could ask for, really. He's amazing.
I had a really bad experience, and that kind of snowballed because I didn't have my mom there to talk to. I didn't think I had anyone to talk to. I cut all my hair off.
About that experience.
A little. I haven't quite yet gotten everything back, memory-wise. But when I was younger, my dad was at work, you know, I used to have this boyfriend, and he lived in the same town my mom did, so when I moved away, I didn't get to see him that much. So one time I decided, hey, I'll bike there, which was about 20 miles. A lot of it was uphill. And that day it was raining. I remember thinking that was kind of funny later on, considering what happened, that it was raining so hard, it was almost like I shouldn't have gone there. And I got there, and his parents weren't home. His mom wasn't home.
How old was he?
He was a few years younger than me. He was about 16 at that point. And, you know, I got there, and he was the only one home. He was, I guess, what you would call sexually more mature than me because he was older. I was only 13. I wasn't big into, I didn't know anything about relationships yet. It was my first one, really, so I didn't think anything of it. And, you know, when boys are younger like that, they tease you and they flirt and they push things, which really, I say it like that, but it's not really acceptable because of how it turns out most of the time. But, you know, he took it too far, and he really fucked me up, and I don't know if he knew at the time what he was doing. I mean, of course he did. He was 16. He's a person. He knew what he was doing, and he just. There's a thing I learned called repression, and that's what I did afterwards. It's something that you do when you go through a traumatic experience. So I didn't remember really what had happened for a while after that, maybe about a year, because it was so violent. I didn't ever tell my parents. I didn't tell anybody for a long time. My parents still don't know what happened. I told my dad that he hurt me, that he was abusive, but that's all I could really stand to tell him, because no parent wants to hear that. Even though if you look at the statistics and you know that the statistics are even lower than what actually is real, then it happens to almost half of girls my age, even younger. But that was another thing, and it happened around the same time that she left, so everything kind of snowballed into this place where I didn't know where to go or what to do. So I just switched, and I stopped talking. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to talk to, so I didn't. And I lost a lot of my friends because of that. They didn't know what was going on. They just thought I was, I just didn't like them anymore. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to do anything. I was angry all the time. I was sad. I spent a lot of time alone. I spent a lot of time in my room with earphones on. I didn't want to hear anything. I just listened to music that I wanted to listen to, and so they kind of just stopped talking to me after a while. And then I moved in with my dad, and he saw that too, and he didn't know why. I mean, he knew part of it was because of my mom, which is understandable. but he couldn't understand why he couldn't do anything to help me. He didn't get it. And I think it's because he was expecting this to happen, with my mom, that is. He knows her really well, and I guess that he actually had been waiting for that to happen for a long time. So I guess it didn't surprise him when it did. I do remember times when, I was in that bad place, and I would do those things, and it wasn't to the point where I ever wanted to, slip into something that would take me really far away for a long time. It would always be in the moment, and I would remember doing certain things, like LSD things, that would make you'd make you feel really good. And there would be this, at least for me, I don't know, I guess I kind of got a small understanding maybe of addiction through this. There would be this small feeling when you feel yourself coming down from it, or you don't want it to. Because even if your life at that time isn't really bad, you might be remembering things that were. And you might feel really good, and you might sit there and be thinking all these things and feel great about yourself while you're on them, and just feel like you feel so in tune with things, and you just feel so good about yourself. And when you felt so bad about yourself for a long period of time, you don't want that to stop. You want to feel good about yourself. So there were times when I was on certain things like acid or Molly where you feel really good, and then you're up all night and you see the sun coming up, and you can feel the end of it coming, and it makes you kind of sad, because it's like the end of the night, it's the end of the party, it's the end of the feeling that you're having right now. And it never got to the point where, I was always self-conscious enough where I realized that was okay, I needed to let it end. But there was always that the daylight's gonna end it. It's gonna end the night. And it's kind of a sad feeling, and I kind of thought about it once and thought that must be how it must feel on a small scale to be addicted to a drug, because it's like you just don't want that feeling to end. But just in society a lot, like when they, from an early age at least, I learned this, if you're too different, there's something wrong with you. Which kind of translates to, if you have too many emotions, there's something wrong with you. Which translates to, don't talk about your emotions a lot, because there's going to be something wrong with you. If you're, why are you so emotional about this? Everyone else is fine. Which is bullshit, because everyone has problems, they handle them differently. So I think in my generation, exactly, and I think that can be where drugs come in, because if someone grows up their whole life thinking there's something wrong with them and they're not supposed to, but you still have those emotions. Yeah, so it's like, what do you do to find an outlet for those things? And I think if someone finds a drug maybe that makes them feel good, that makes them feel like themselves, makes them feel like they can, you can be weird on drugs. That's what you do on drugs. It's normal to be weird on drugs. So if that becomes something where someone feels comfortable and they feel good while they're using it, and then you're in a society that thinks prescription drugs are okay. Take all these pills so you can be normal. What kind of mentality is that to set up? Why wouldn't someone think that taking a hard drug just because it's not a prescription drug to make them feel good is any different? Even though there's some high risks involved with doing that, but then, if you can't find another outlet. And I remember when I started making real friends here, because I moved pretty far away from home, and I made superficial friends. I remember my freshman roommate, when I had just started talking about what happened to me when I was younger with the first boyfriend, with that whole thing, with the assault and everything, I started to learn that talking about it was bringing my memories back. It was helping me, because I had kept it in for so long, and that was bad. That brought a lot of bad things to the surface that I didn't understand, like rage, like issues that I couldn't understand. I started getting night terrors, really bad nightmares. And I remember trying to tell my roommate, who I didn't have really good friends at this point. I had friends. I had the girls on my floor. And girls can be cruel. They can be fake. Everyone can be. But, you know, I'm a girl, so I can say that. And I tried to talk to her about it. I knew she wasn't like the best person in the world, but you know, I live with her. You know, I should be able to talk to her. I'm going to try this opening up thing to other people. And what she said, I still can't fathom. I really can't. I told her this horrible thing that happened to me, and I mean, it took a lot. You could tell. I remember the way I was talking. I remember how I choked when I was talking. I remember how I had a hard time getting it out. It wasn't, and I don't have an easy time telling you now, but back then, to imagine, it was the third person maybe I told. It wasn't easy. I couldn't get it all out. I had trouble piecing it all together. And at the end of all of it, she just looks at me like it was nothing and just says, "Oh, so what?" So he just tried to put his in your mouth. Or something like that. Something so unfathomably insensitive. I couldn't understand like how that could be a reaction from somebody. It blew my mind. And luckily, I mean, that made me not want to talk about it, obviously, to anybody ever again. Because I was like, well, okay, that's the reaction I'm going to get. I'm not going to get, but if that's like, that's the kind of thing that's going to happen when I try to tell somebody this. I'm trying to open up to them. If that's what's going to happen, I don't want to talk about it anymore. So I didn't for a while again. I stopped talking about it again. Right, because I thought that's how we handle things. It's going to be a normal thing, I guess. And it happens all the time, so I guess it's a normal thing. So
still want kids to choose healthy behaviors, the kind of behaviors that are going to make kids thrive far into the future. Let's look at behavioral change. It's pretty well studied. What we know is that there are 5-ish steps to behavioral change. The first thing that we need to do is we need to make it so the kids are aware of a problem. That's why we teach them. But if you just make kids aware, that's not going to get them really too far because they have to be personally motivated. If you're aware that something's happening to other people, you're still not going to take any action because you don't know that it affects you. So we have to have kids understand that this problem can affect them. But then we have to take it another step. Because what we normally do with education is we say, this is what will happen to you and this is what you better do. But we don't give them the skills of what to do, right? So if I tell you that in order to be safe, you need to use protection, but you don't know how to deal with a partner who looks at you and who says, what, you don't trust me? Is that why you want me to use this? If you don't know how to deal with that, you're not going to be able to listen to what I'm suggesting. So when we make people aware and we make people motivated, but we don't give them skills, we actually do more harm than good. Why? Because we produce kids who are frustrated, motivated but frustrated. Frustration leads to stress. Stress drives all negative behavior. You've done more harm than good. So we give them skills. And then what happens? Kids are going to go through a process of weighing the costs and benefits. What's good about what I'm doing? What's bad about what I'm doing? What's better about this new behavior? What's worse about this new behavior? You know, I'm 16 years old and I'm thinking of quitting smoking cigarettes and I'm saving $8 a day and my teeth aren't yellow and when she kisses me, she doesn't go, ooh, and that's all good, but gosh, I'm nervous. That kid's not ready to quit. Why? Because until we teach him how to calm his nerves, it's never gonna feel better to quit. Finally, final thing is, am I going to maintain the new behavior or am I going to give up on the new behavior? Am I going to relapse? That's about how people reinforce or undermine my behavior. I choose not to have sex. What's going to happen when I turn on the TV and I see someone like me who's choosing not to have sex? Do they look like one of the popular kids? What's going to happen when I talk to my friends about my choice? Are they going to say to you, Ken, you have a really strong spiritual center? Or are they going to go, what's wrong with you? It's all about how people are responded to once they've chosen their behavior. So again, all behavioral change theories in a blender. Here's what they say. Are you aware? Are you motivated? Do you have the skills? Are you prepared to move forward even when you weigh the costs and benefits, and once you're there, are people going to undermine or support your behavior? But you know what? All the behavioral change theories are missing something huge. What they're missing is that some kids are incredibly demoralized. Some kids aren't ready to get on the playing field. Some kids can hear, but they can't listen. Why? Because they've absorbed a message from too many people that says that they're incapable for one reason or another, what they look like, who they are, how much money they have. For one reason or another, they don't believe they're capable of change. I believe that the key thing to do when you're working with a young person who's demoralized, who's oppressed, perhaps who's depressed, but who's marginalized for one reason or another, is to love them. Because love breaks demoralization. What does love mean? You know, we speak English, and so love sounds like it could be a dirty thing. And because of that, I don't use the word with kids. But if we were speaking any one of a number of other language, we would be talking about loving kindness, the love of humanity, and that's what I'm talking about. What I do when I sit with a kid is I let myself fall in love. What blows me away about that kid? Resilience in the context of a life that would have destroyed me. Compassion in a young person who was shown none. Someone who has grew up and saw his mother beaten by his father, but who wants to grow up to protect battered women. You listen to those stories. You say very little, but you hear them. And when you hear them, you reflect it back to the kid. And suddenly, they begin to open up. You've taken shame and stigma away from the room, and instead you've added hope. Not hope that I've showered on you, not hope that I have falsely put on you, but hope that existed within you based on who you are, who you really are, how you've survived, how you've risen, based on who you are. That's what I call love. Eliciting the stories, hearing kids like they've never been heard before, and telling them their stories back in a way that they've never heard before. Let me tell you something. If you talk to people who are 25 or 26 and they've turned their lives around, and you know they were like living the life when they're 18, 19, 20, 14, 15, 16, and you ask them what it was that made a difference, it's always the same answer. It was when Miss Cordella, Mr. Steve, Mr. Hugh, Miss Lucretia, it's when they made me understand that I wasn't trash. That is the pivotal moment of change in a young person's life. And that is what every one of us can do. It doesn't take training. It takes your heart and your ears.
One of my earliest memories is of trying to wake up one of my relatives and not being able to. And I was just a little kid, so I didn't really understand why. But as I got older, I realized we had drug addiction in my family, including later cocaine addiction. I've been thinking about it a lot lately, partly because it's now exactly 100 years since drugs were first banned in the United States and Britain, and we then imposed that on the rest of the world. It's a century since we made this really fateful decision to take addicts and punish them and make them suffer because we believed that would deter them, it would give them an incentive to stop. And a few years ago, I was looking at some of the addicts in my life who I love and trying to figure out if there was some way to help them. And I realized there were loads of incredibly basic questions I just didn't know the answer to. Like, what really causes addiction? Why do we carry on with this approach that doesn't seem to be working? And is there a better way out there that we could try instead? So I read loads of stuff about it, and I couldn't really find the answers I was looking for. So I thought, okay, I'll go and sit with different people around the world who've lived this and studied this and talk to them and see if I can learn from them. And I didn't realize I would end up going over 30,000 miles at the start, but I ended up going and meeting loads of different people, from a transgender crack dealer in Brownsville, Brooklyn, to a scientist who spends a lot of time feeding hallucinogens to mongooses to see if they like them. It turns out they do, but only in very specific circumstances. To the only country that's ever decriminalized all drugs, from cannabis to crack, Portugal. And the thing I realized that really blew my mind is Almost everything we think we know about addiction is wrong. And if we start to absorb the new evidence about addiction, I think we're going to have to change a lot more than our drug policies. But let's start with what we think we know, what I thought I know, right? Let's think about this middle row here, right? Imagine all of you, for 20 days now, went off and used heroin 3 times a day. Some of you look a little bit more enthusiastic than others at this prospect. Don't worry, it's just a thought experiment. Imagine you did that, right? What would happen? Now, we have a story about what would happen that we've been told for a century. We think because there are chemical hooks in heroin, as you took it for a while, your body would become dependent on those hooks, you'd start to physically need them, and at the end of those 20 days, you'd all be heroin addicts, right? That's what I thought. First thing that alerted me to the fact something not right with this story is when it was explained to me, if I step out of this TED Talk today and I get hit by a car and I break my hip, I'll be taken to hospital and I'll be given loads of diamorphine. Diamorphine is heroin. It's actually much better heroin than you're ever going to buy on the streets, because the stuff you buy from a drug dealer is contaminated, actually very little of it is heroin, whereas the stuff you get from the doctor is medically pure. And you'll be given it for quite a long period of time. There are loads of people in this room who may not realize that you've taken quite a lot of heroin, right? And anyone watching this anywhere in the world, this is happening. And if what we believe about addiction is right, those people are exposed to all those chemical hooks. What should happen? They should become addicts. This has been studied really carefully. It doesn't happen. You will have noticed if your grandmother had a hip replacement, she didn't come out as a junkie. And when I learned this, it just seemed so weird to me, so contrary to everything I'd been told, everything I thought I knew. I just thought it couldn't be right. Until I went and met a man called Bruce Alexander, who's a professor of psychology in Vancouver, who carried out an incredible experiment that I think really helps us to understand this issue. Professor Alexander explained to me, the idea of addiction we've all got in our heads, that story, comes partly from a series of experiments that were done earlier in the 20th century. They're really simple experiments. You can do them tonight when you go home if you feel a little bit sadistic. You get a rat and you put it in a cage, and you give it 2 water bottles. One is just water, and the other is water laced with either heroin or cocaine. If you do that, the rat will almost always prefer the drugged water and almost always kill itself quite quickly. So there you go, right? That's how we think it works. In the 70s, Professor Alexander comes along and he looks at this experiment and he noticed something. He said, we're putting the rat in an empty cage. It's got nothing to do except use these drugs. Let's try something a bit different. So Professor Alexander built a cage that he called Rat Park, which is basically heaven for rats, right? They've got loads of cheese, they've got loads of colored balls, they've got loads of tunnels. Crucially, they've got loads of friends, they can have loads of sex, and they've got both the water bottles, the normal water and the drugged water. But here's the fascinating thing. In Rat Park, they don't like the drugged water. They almost never use it. None of them ever use it compulsively. None of them ever overdose. You go from almost 100% overdose when they're isolated to 0% overdose when they have happy and connected lives. Now, when he first saw this, Professor Alexander thought, maybe this is just a thing about rats. They're quite different to us. Maybe not as different as we'd like, but But fortunately, there was a human experiment into the exact same principle happening at the exact same time. It was called the Vietnam War. In Vietnam, 20% of all American troops were using loads of heroin. And if you look at the news reports from the time, they were really worried because they thought, my God, we're going to have hundreds of thousands of junkies on the streets of the United States when the war ends. It made total sense. Now, those soldiers who were using loads of heroin were followed home. The Archives of General Psychiatry did a really detailed study, and what happened to them? It turns out they didn't go to rehab. They didn't go into withdrawal. 95% of them just stopped. Now, if you believe the story about chemical hooks, that makes absolutely no sense. But Professor Alexander began to think there might be a different story about addiction. He said, what if addiction isn't about your chemical hooks? What if addiction is about your cage? What if addiction is an adaptation to your environment? Looking at this, there was another professor called Peter Cohen in the Netherlands who said, maybe we shouldn't even call it addiction. Maybe we should call it bonding. Human beings have a natural and innate need to bond. And when we're happy and healthy, we'll bond and connect with each other. But if you can't do that because you're traumatized or isolated or beaten down by life, you will bond with something that will give you some sense of relief. Now, that might be gambling, that might be pornography, that might be cocaine, that might be cannabis, but you will bond and connect with something because that's our nature. That's what we want as human beings. And I think, at first I found this quite a difficult thing to get my head around, but one way that helped me to think about it is, and I can see Yeah, I've got over by my seat there a bottle of water, right? I'm looking at lots of you, and lots of you have bottles of water with you, right? Forget drugs, forget the drug war. Totally legally, all of those bottles of water could be bottles of vodka, right? We could all be getting drunk, I might after this. But we're not, right? Now, because you've been able to afford the approximately a gazillion pounds that it costs to get into a TED Talk, I'm guessing you guys could afford to be drinking vodka for the next 6 months. You wouldn't end up homeless. You're not going to do that. And the reason you're not going to do that is not because anyone's stopping you. It's because you've got bonds and connections that you want to be present for. You've got work you love. You've got people you love. You've got healthy relationships. And a core part of addiction, I came to think, and I believe the evidence suggests, is about not being able to bear to be present in your life. Now, this has really significant implications. The most obvious implications are for the war on drugs, right? In Arizona, I went out with a group of women who were made to wear T-shirts saying I was a drug addict and go out on chain gangs and dig graves while members of the public could jeer at them. And when those women get out of prison, they're going to have criminal records that mean they'll never work in the legal economy again. Now, that's a very extreme example, obviously, in the case of the chain gang, but actually almost everywhere in the world we treat addicts to some degree like that. We punish them, we shame them, we give them criminal records, we put barriers between them reconnecting. There was a doctor in Canada, Dr. Gabor Mate, an amazing man, who said to me, if you wanted to design a system that would make addiction worse, you would design that system. Now, there's a place that decided to do the exact opposite, and I went there to see how it worked. In the year 2000, Portugal had one of the worst drug problems in Europe. 1% of the population was addicted to heroin, which is kind of mind-blowing. And every year, they tried the American way more and more. They punished people and stigmatized them and shamed them more. And every year, the problem got worse. And one day, the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition got together and basically said, look, we can't go on with a country where we're having ever more people becoming heroin addicts. Let's set up a panel of scientists and doctors to figure out what would genuinely solve the problem. And they set up a panel led by an amazing man called Dr. Joao Gulao to look at all this new evidence. And they came back and they said, decriminalize all drugs, from cannabis to crack. But, and this is the crucial next step, take all the money we used to spend on cutting addicts off, on disconnecting them, and spend it instead on reconnecting them with the society. And that's not, essentially, that's not really what we think of. What they did wasn't really what we think of as drug treatment in the United States and Britain. So they do residential rehab, they do psychological therapy that does have some value. But the biggest thing they did was the complete opposite of what we do. A massive program of job creation for addicts and microloans for addicts to set up small businesses. So say you used to be a mechanic. When you're ready, they go to a garage and they'll say, if you employ this guy for a year, we'll pay half his wages. The goal was to make sure that every addict in Portugal had something to get out of bed for in the morning. And when I went and met the addicts in Portugal, it's fascinating. What they said is, as they rediscovered purpose, they rediscovered bonds and relationships with the wider society. It'll be 15 years this year since that experiment began, and the results are in. Injecting drug use is down in Portugal, according to the British Journal of Criminology, by 50%, 50%. Overdose is massively down. HIV is massively down among addicts. Addiction in every study is significantly down. One of the ways you know it's worked so well is that almost nobody in Portugal wants to go back to the old system. Now, that's the kind of political implications. I actually think there's a layer of implications to all this research below that. You know, we live in a culture where people feel really increasingly vulnerable to all sorts of addictions, whether it's to their smartphones or to shopping or to eating. You know, before these talks began, you guys know this, that we were told we weren't allowed to have our smartphones on. And I have to say, a lot of you looked an awful lot like addicts who were being told their dealer was going to be unavailable for the next couple of hours. And, you know, a lot of us feel like that. And it might sound weird to say, oh, you know, I've been talking about how disconnection is a major driver of addiction. But weird to say it's growing because you think, well, we're the most connected society there's ever been, surely. But I increasingly began to think that the connection we have, the connections we have, we think we have, are like a kind of parody of human connection. If you have a crisis in your life, you'll notice something. It won't be your Twitter followers who come to sit with you. It won't be your Facebook friends who help you turn it round. It'll be your flesh and blood friends who you have deep and nuanced and textured face-to-face relationships with. And I think there's a study I learned about from Bill McKibben, the environmental writer, I think tells us a lot about this. It looked at the number of close friends the average American believes they can call on in a crisis. That number has been declining steadily since the 1950s. The amount of floor space an individual has in their home has been steadily increasing. And I think that's like a metaphor for the choice we've made as a culture, right? We've traded floor space for friends. We've traded stuff for connections. And the result is that we are one of the loneliest societies there has ever been. And yet Bruce Alexander, the guy who did the Rat Park experiment, says, we talk all the time in addiction about individual recovery. And it's right to talk about that. But we need to talk much more about social recovery. Something's gone wrong with us, not just as individuals, but as a group. And we created a society where, for a lot of us, life looks a whole lot more like that isolated cage and a whole lot less like Rat Park. But if I'm honest, this isn't why I went into it, right? I didn't go in to discover the political stuff, the social stuff. I wanted to know how to help the people I love. And when I came back from this long journey and I'd learned all this, I looked at the addicts in my life, and if you're really candid, it's hard loving an addict, and there's going to be lots of people who know in this room you're angry a lot of the time. And I think one of the reasons why this debate is so charged is because it runs through the heart of each of us, right? Everyone has a bit of them that looks at an addict and thinks, I wish someone would just stop you. And the kind of script we're told for how to deal with the addicts in our life is typified by, I think, by the reality show Intervention. If you guys haven't seen it, I think everything in our lives is typified by reality TV, but that's another TED Talk. If you've never seen the show Intervention, it's a pretty simple premise. You get an addict, all the people in their life, gather them together, and say, if you don't shape up, confront them with what they're doing, and they say, if you don't shape up, we're going to cut you off, right? So what they do is they take the connection to the addict, and they threaten it. They make it contingent on the addict behaving the way they want. And I began to see why that approach doesn't work. And I began to think that almost that's like the importing of the logic of the drug war into our private lives. So I was thinking, well, how can I be Portuguese, right? And what I try to do now, and I can't tell you I do it consistently, and I can't tell you it's easy, is to say to the addicts in my life that I want to deepen the connection with them, to say to them, I love you whether you're using or you're not. I love you whatever state you're in, and if you need me, I'll come and sit with you, because I love you and I don't want you to be alone or to feel alone. And I think the core of that message, you're not alone, we love you, has to be at every level of how we respond to addicts, socially, politically, and individually. For 100 years now, we've been singing war songs about addicts. I think all along we should have been singing love songs to them, because the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. Thank you.
I like to think of resilience as being able to be captured in a framework that includes the 7 C's. The 7 C's are masterfully stolen from the Positive Youth Development Movement, which has 5 of the C's. What are those C's? The first thing we need is confidence, right? We're going to be resilient. We're going to be able to bounce back if we believe we can. We knew for 20 years how to build confidence in kids. It was give them self-esteem. That's why we had kids draw out pictures of butterflies in kindergarten. All the butterflies went on the wall, and then we said to the kids, each of you, you're as special as a butterfly. Lesson 2 was we would cut out snowflakes, and they would go out on the wall, and the lesson to the kids was, each of you, you're as unique as a snowflake. We taught parents to praise absolutely everything that their children did. We applauded as the kids came down on the sliding board saying, good job, good job, good job, never giving any credit at all to gravity. What happened? By raising kids with just showering them with self-esteem, they ended up having very high rates of anxiety and even depression. What's going on? Do you ever have those moments where you don't feel as special as a butterfly? We didn't prepare kids to know how to deal with those moments. Real confidence comes not from people showering vapid praise on you. Real confidence comes from your internal sense of competence, knowing that you have skills, knowing that you have abilities, and having adults help you to develop those abilities. Have adults see those abilities in you, and above all, have adults not undermine those abilities by telling you what you are or not capable of. The next C is connection. Bottom line is that the kids who are going to make it are the kids who know that someone has their back. better if there are circles around them of multiple adults who have their back. That's what's going to give them the confidence to be able to take chances. But up until now, if we look at the first 3 C's, kids who are really confident, kids who are really competent, kids who are really connected, you've described a gang member. So what else do you need? You need character, a sense of what is right and a sense of what is wrong. You need character, grit, tenacity, being able to stick with things. What else do you need? A sense of contribution, knowing that you're making a difference in the world. Why? The ultimate act of resilience during the worst of times is to reach out to another human being and say, brother, I need a hand. What is going to allow you to do that without shame or stigma? It's the experience of having served. When you serve, when you give, you learn something. You learn that it feels good. And when you know that it feels good, it's easier to take when you need to take. So when I'm an old man and someone is changing me or feeding me, I'll know that there's not pity in the room, just another human being who also has a life mission to serve. But it's more than that. Teenagers are held to low expectations. All teenagers walk down the street and people think they're selfish, self-involved, at risk. That doesn't even begin to describe the low expectations that we hold our oppressed minority kids to. It is poison. And because resilience kids live up or down to your expectations of them, we simply have to turn the ship around. So when we have kids contributing out in the community, what happens? Suddenly these same kids who normally we walk past and look as if they're dangerous, suddenly those kids are receiving thank yous instead of condemnation. And it's difficult to describe how important it is for kids to know how much they matter to other people. And you learn that through thank yous. And you get thank yous through contribution. Next, coping. You know, virtually everything we fear in adolescence is about kids trying to feel better in the context of a life that feels uncomfortable. Whether you're talking about drugs, whether you're talking about cutting, whether you're talking about eating disorders, whether you're talking about fighting, whether you're talking about gaming, everything, sex out of the context of a relationship, everything we fear, everything we don't want our kids to do is about them trying to feel better. And when we say to them, don't do that, let me give you 5 to 7 reasons why you should know what you're doing is wrong, that just makes them feel small. It takes away their confidence because we're calling them incompetent. Instead, when we congratulate them for finding something, anything that works, and then we invite them in a healing process to teach them a whole repertoire of positive coping strategies, then we can really diminish risk behaviors. But why wait till kids are already doing it? Why not start with kids in nursery school, kids in kindergarten? Teach them about all the ways you can feel better. Teach them about all the ways you can manage stress. If we do that, that's when we're going to really see some of these problem behaviors go away. The final C is control. You either believe that the world happens to you, or you believe you have control over your universe. Dr. Ken, when your time comes, you know, bullets are flying. That's a kid who doesn't believe they have a sense of control over their life, and they'll take control in any way that they can. Where do we give kids a sense of control? First off, we stop the bullets from flying. What else do? We teach them discipline. Remember what discipline means. Discipline means to teach. It doesn't mean to punish, it doesn't mean to harm, and it doesn't mean to control. When we discipline kids, instead of saying, you'll do what I say, why? Because I said so, that makes kids feel small. When instead we discipline them saying, you know, we honor your growing independence. We want you to know how to stand on your own and to navigate these waters on your own. We want that, but we need for you to be safe and need to be responsible. So the privileges that we are going to give you, the freedoms that you have, will be earned by your demonstrated responsibility and good behavior. When we do that, kids do the right thing because they are in control of their behavior.
For all those times you stood by me, for all the truth that you made me see, for all the joy you brought to my life, for all the wrong that you made right, for every dream you made come true, for all the love I found in you, I'll be forever because you